Hello, everyone, and welcome to this recorded interview with the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, focusing on whether or not Palestinians actually support Hamas and what it means in this broader context. We understand that this is a very sensitive and emotional subject for many people, especially since the crisis began on October 7th, but we are really excited to have this opportunity to have this kind of conversation, to contextualize things, and to make people more aware as to the realities on the ground in the long-standing conflict of Israel and the Palestinians. My name is Tim Horgan. I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we are here to act as a platform for conversation about global issues. We want to help people better understand what is going on through the world through speakers programs, through podcast, international visitor exchanges, and diplomacy simulations at the high school level. Being a nonpartisan organization, we do not take any organizational stances, and therefore the views and opinions expressed here today and throughout any of our series of programs is simply those of the speaker, and we try to create and to curate some really great speakers. And I'm happy to say that we have done a great job here today with this the speaker that we will bring on screen now, Michael Robbins, who is the co-director and the co-principal and lead investigator at Arab Barometer, a nonprofit that is based at Princeton University and has been working since 2006 to conduct in-person, face-to-face interviews across the Middle East and North Africa in order to better understand the temperature of those countries, of the people. And amazingly enough, this organization finished conducting their latest round of interviews in the West Bank and Gaza, talking with over 1,000 people on October 6th, a day before the Hamas attacks on civilian populations in Israel. So we are here. We're so excited to have you, Michael, and thank you so much for giving us the time, which I know is a limited quantity at this point.
Well, thanks so much, Tim. It's wonderful to be here and really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
So just give us a bit of a background, a bit of insight into what Arab Barometer is, what you do, and how you do it, so people can better understand the scientific method and the well-researched approaches that you guys take to better understanding the issues that are driving the Middle East today.
Sure. So Arab Barometer was created in 2006, and it essentially came out of the vacuum that we didn't have that much information about the ordinary citizens who live across the Middle East and North Africa. At the time, there really weren't meaningful elections in any country. There have been some perhaps since then, but really this was the first glimpse at what citizens thought. A lot of this came out of, you can think about the post-2001 environment, where there were a lot of accusations, a lot of claims being made about what people thought in this region, the so-called Arab Street, as Tom Friedman put, the Arab basement, things like that. But we really wanted to bring this out and to show what people thought about their world. And what we showed was, their views on the economy, on politics, on international affairs, on gender, women's rights, things like this. So it was a broad-based survey to try and really take the temperature. Since that time, we've really expanded, and this is something that I think has been, reflecting the changes that have happened across the region. We did our second wave during the Arab uprisings. We're actually in the country we're in the field in 4 countries when Mubarak fell in Egypt. And it really then expanded to think more about political systems, about how people interacted with their political environment, what they thought about democracy, what they wanted for their futures. In the end, it shifted back, and so we've really tried to update the instrument, and particularly in light of COVID, reflecting some of those changes, but then also reflecting on the post-COVID environment, certainly the challenges we've seen in the last few waves with hunger across the region and things like this. And so just updating that, but really the whole goal is to work with people in the region, work with partners in the region. A majority of our steering committee comes from the region itself, and to create an environment where we actually have data, where we have reliable data on what publics think. And to do that, we go, as you said, face-to-face, door-to-door across the country. So we do create an environment where people are comfortable giving their opinions. This is something that happens in their home, in their residence. This isn't something where the government can really hear, and that's a place in almost all of the countries that we survey that really there's not as much fear. I mean, there are some countries that this is becoming a greater challenge in the region, but historically, it's been a place that people can really, in confidence, give their responses, give their true beliefs, and then we can report it back. And so we use this data pretty broadly. We use it for the media, for policymakers, to just try and give the background, the story, and to allow ordinary citizens to be taken into account when making decisions that affect the region, when governments are using it. And I think we've really shown a lot of growth in those areas in terms of the ability to have reliable data that citizens can use, that policymakers, that NGOs, others can use to really try to help bring better outcomes to those living in the region.
That's great. And you guys must have seen a lot of really interesting developments over that time frame, from, as you mentioned, the Arab Spring to the crashing back to authoritarianism that many of those countries have experienced, civil wars across the area, and some pretty important international issues that are really impacting lives on the ground there. So thank you so much for doing this work. For me personally, it has been very illuminative, particularly on the topic that we're here to talk about today, the support or lack thereof of Palestinians for Hamas. As you mentioned, many of these countries do not host elections. There's not been an election in the Gaza Strip since 2007, I believe. And the political organization that is Hamas has really cracked down in those areas that they control. So let's start at the 10,000-foot view. And first, I would love for you to take just a couple minutes to explain some of the actors, some of the leaders that are involved in this, and that you really surveyed the Palestinians about their viewpoints of, and why those people are sort of important to understanding the broader context of life in Palestine.
That's the great question. When we did this, a lot of the focus of the recent data has been on Gaza, given the events are really focused on Gaza. But we did design this as part of the beginning of our 8th wave of surveys across the region, with both the West Bank and Gaza Strip included. And so the idea is to give a sense of what Palestinians think. And so we do have the challenges. The last election in 2006 descended into conflict, where there was really a break between Fatah, which is basically the leading party in the PLO, and then the Palestinian Authority, which was governing the West Bank and Gaza, and then Hamas, which won the parliamentary elections in 2006. And so with the civil conflict there, we saw a divide, and basically there has been essentially a political division between the PA, which governs which under the occupation governs the cities in the West Bank, and Gaza, where Israel had withdrawn from in 2005, where Hamas essentially had control. So there'd been this split. There'd been discussions of having elections over time. And we do see is kind of a sense more broadly of the different actors. We take a survey that includes the different actors. And so the Palestinian Authority, or Fatah, President Mahmoud Abbas, who has been elected originally to a 4-year term, and I think is now in the 17th or 18th year of that 4-year term. We have on the other side Hamas, which has not allowed the elections, and the separate part, which has been governing Gaza. And then the final person that we really ask about is somebody who used to be a key member of Fatah, who has since been arrested by Israel and been jailed for charges of terrorism, and has remained in power. And so that's Marwan Barghouti, who still has a role in kind of the Palestinian mind, and is one of the key leaders. So it's kind of the person between the two groups in a way that has some legitimacy in the minds of many Palestinians. We've seen that over the years. And so again, there is this kind of difference of control across the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But that's essentially the environment that we were working with when we conducted this survey.
And can you just give a little bit of insight? You also asked people about their views of Palestinian Jihad, the sort of the group that seemingly works with Hamas, but also kind of piled on to this attack on Israel. Who are they, and what sort of are their goals in all of this?
So Islamic Jihad is a group that is stronger in Gaza, but has a presence really throughout Palestine. It's a group that has never accepted the peace process, has never been a part of that, and has been a group that is basically even, I think, to some extent more militant than Hamas. That it has been firing rocket attacks. It's never really necessarily um, come under the kind of at times tacit truce between Israel and Hamas. That it's always been a different actor, particularly in the Gaza Strip, that has been launching rockets at Israel and certainly been engaged in a more militant kind of resistance to the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit just about what your research told you? Again, this is very recent data. It's 3 weeks old at this point, but of course we know a lot has changed in that time frame. So, what was your data telling you at that time as to where Palestinians were feeling about support for political parties, no parties? What was the general feeling you guys were receiving?
So a lot of the focus of the survey itself was on government and conditions, and what we saw was that overall Gazans were in a very difficult situation before the attacks. And again, I should say all these data, as you point out, come from before the Hamas attacks on October 7th. We got out of the field in Gaza on October 6th, and so this data does predate that. So it is kind of a picture of what life was like at the time of these attacks, and doesn't really reflect what comes after that. What we did find is that people are very, very frustrated with their situation. That 75% of citizens in Gaza said that they had not, they'd missed a meal, that they'd gone hungry in the past month, they didn't have enough money for food. We saw that there was significant frustration with corruption, that a clear majority said that there was corruption in the government. And so this certainly led to a lot of resentment. Economic conditions are bad. There'd been a long kind of just deterioration. Inflation remained high as it did across the world. And so what we see naturally is that people often in those situations blame the government. And in this case, it seems that they were turning to the Hamas government of not providing the conditions under which they could live their basic lives. And so only 29% said that they had trust in any degree of trust really in the Hamas government. And at the same time, if we said the percent that said they had no trust at all was 44%. So nearly half said they had zero trust in the Hamas-led government. That extends to just a broader piece. If we ask, what party do you feel closest to? Just 27% said that Hamas was their preferred party, which is actually lower than Fatah in the Gaza Strip, slightly, but still bit lower. And so we do see that there is very little confidence in Hamas overall. We also asked, in theory, if there were new elections to be held, who would you vote for? And in the Gaza Strip itself, only 24% said they'd vote for Ismail Haniyeh, who is the leader of Hamas, and at least historically in the Gaza Strip. That was trailing Marwan Barghouti, who I was mentioning earlier, at 32%. Mahmoud Abbas would have 12%, and 30% said they simply would not participate in elections at this time. And so you can see that basically, no matter how we look at this, Hamas actually had very little support amongst the population itself. I think one of the more surprising findings that we had here was that we were trying to understand, how do people assess blame in a sense? And Gazans at the time, when we said, what is responsible for the poor economic conditions? The most common response was government mismanagement, followed by inflation, which was actually above the percent saying the externally exposed sanctions, such as the Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip, was to blame. So really, there was a fair amount of anger at the Hamas government for the mismanagement in the minds of ordinary civilians within the Gaza Strip.
I'd love to just sort of provide and gain your insights on a little context of what that actually means. The Pew Research Center has released data saying that 16% of Americans have confidence in their government to do the right thing. That may be a bit of apples and oranges there. So I'd love to hear from you, based on your other previous surveys of other countries in the region. How do those numbers compare to support in various countries that are sort of bellwethers of the greater Middle East and North Africa?
So trust tends to be low, and this is something we're seeing worldwide. Is there's a crisis of confidence in government. So it is something that's not unique. We have seen a significant decline in views of government across the region over the past almost 2 decades that we've been surveying. Certainly, this was never something that was generally that high. There are a few places like Kuwait where it tends to be a bit higher than elsewhere in the region. But we do see that there is kind of a lack of hope. That governments have not been able to in the Middle East and North Africa largely been able to improve the lives of citizens, to do things that are in the minds. And most people think the government is not responsive in the region to their basic needs. In a place like Jordan, we've seen this really decline very, very precipitously in the past 17 years, basically. We have seen other places where it has changed. I mean, and one of the alarming aspects is in a place like Tunisia, we've seen actually a fair amount of shift after the events of July 2021, when Kais Saied essentially disbanded parliament and what I might call a coup myself, took over, and that basically he was promising a populist message saying that he was going to fix the situation, that he got the political parties out of the way, things like that. We saw a significant increase in trust in government, particularly trust for him himself. And so I do think that it goes back to the point that citizens across the region have been very frustrated, very disappointed in the economic outcomes. In a place like Tunisia, for example, the GDP per capita now is lower than it was at the time of the Jasmine Revolution in 2011. And so this is a broader issue that we see across the region. But when there is somebody who can come and say, I'm giving you hope, these type of things, we do see an increase in the data. At that same token, I think we're expecting to see a bit of a decline, that the promises that were made in Tunisia a couple of years ago have not really been fulfilled. And so there are challenges, but it is a broad issue we're seeing across the entire region, is this lack of trust in government.
Well, it's sometimes comforting to know that we're not the only ones, but at other times not so comforting. So the next question I have for you is around, one of the specific questions you guys asked in this most recent round of surveys surrounded how responsive Hamas was. And I found that to be really interesting when you break it down into the different areas that you found that people were feeling were the best way to influence their government. But overall, there was not a huge belief in, the Hamas government really representing the people and being open to their needs. So can you talk a little bit about that data?
Sure, absolutely. So what we found is that only about a quarter say that the government was responsive to their needs to any level. And basically, when we ask people, how would you influence the government if you wanted to take an action? What would be the way that you could actually do this? And the plurality, the most common response was that there is no effective way to influence the government. That was followed basically by working through personal connections, what they call wasta in the Middle East, but an intermediary who had some connection to government. So it is a government that was seen as essentially relatively remote from the people. And again, kind of reflecting back on this historically, that this is a challenge that I think the Gazans and Palestinians overall have felt, that certainly by the time of the 2006 election, there was frustration with the current regime. Hamas represented an alternative. That I think a number of people did give Hamas their vote. They gave them the chance to potentially be an alternative to the PA. And as that's gone over time, they've realized that really Hamas has not been effective at governing in the Gaza Strip, that this has been a difficult situation, one where they were not, they didn't have the opportunity to certainly influence it, to have a responsive government, to have people who were actually caring for the ordinary citizens, that Hamas has its ideology, particularly destroying Israel, that a lot of the focus of the movement, I think, in people's minds seemed to be on this, as opposed to the daily life issues that they were facing. Do they want a solution to their conflict? Absolutely, they do. But at the same time, when there's a focus on these issues as opposed to helping people feed their families, I think that this is certainly something you were unlikely to see. People saying that the government's responsive. So Hamas maybe came in as an alternative in the Gaza Strip. Elsewhere, had higher support. We've seen this in the polling, but certainly, we have seen after the conflict with Fatah, when there was essentially division, the support for Hamas falling pretty dramatically from about 45% to just 27%. So again, as Hamas focuses on issues that aren't really addressing the needs of ordinary citizens, Palestinians respond as I think citizens would anywhere, which is saying the government isn't really dealing with the needs that I have, isn't creating a place where I can doing what they can to help me feed my family, do these basic parts of life, and as a result are saying that Hamas is particularly unresponsive to their needs.
And yet, despite all of this, despite all the challenges of living specifically in Gaza and the West Bank that these people experience on a daily basis, a vast majority of them in your survey responded that they want to stay. They want to live in these areas. Can you talk to that? What does that mean? What does that signal to the broader international community in terms of sort of solutions moving forward?
So there is a 69% of Palestinians say, despite all these challenges, or not Palestinians, sorry, Gazans specifically, that 69% say they don't want to leave their homeland. They've not considered emigrating, which is actually a higher percentage than in about half the countries where we do surveys. It's higher than in places like Jordan. It's higher than places like Tunisia. It's something that is, I think, a very high number, particularly given the challenges that are faced there. But I do think there is a certain sense to tying of the homeland, that the Palestinian narrative is that this is their home, this is where they should be, and there is a political element to this of not giving up. That there is the resistance, that people feel that they need to stay there in the broader sense. The right of return has been so important and such a challenge in the peace process and trying to find a solution to this issue. But the Palestinians really have a strong sense of homeland, a strong sense of security, and I think a willingness to continue fighting in through extremely difficult circumstances for that broader political point that they will not be forced off their land, they will not give up, and that they will continue. And I think that's really part of the Palestinian basically the belief in the nationhood is that we have to stick this out to make sure that we don't lose our land, that the land was lost, the word that they use is disaster, Nakba, for what happened in 1948 when so many were forced off their land and the creation of the state of Israel, that this won't happen again, and that's part of the kind of ethos of the Gazan people and the Palestinian people more broadly at this point. So certainly any solution that is to come to this conflict really can't ignore that fact that Palestinians are not going to leave willingly, no matter how bad the circumstances come, that they will stay, they will defend their land, their territory, and not give up on making this their homeland.
Sorry, I had a little trouble with the mic there. And I think this is borne out and shown in sort of the current response to many of the people of Gaza who are being told to move to the south and flat out are refusing. We hear that a lot. So thank you for that insight. Another area that I found really sort of interesting and almost surprising is the breakdown of people, I think 30 and under, if I remember correctly, and those 30 and over, and their differing views in all of this. Of course, we see difference in opinions in all countries, but specifically, why did you choose that age group to look at in terms of the broader history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and what has it illuminated for you?
So it's a good question. There is a lot of focus, I think, on youth in the Middle East and North Africa more broadly. This is the youth unemployment rates are just astronomically high across the region. It is something that I think there's an interest as people come of age of how they view it. There's a sense that people may be more that this is an area that people could be more frustrated, certainly take more often, perhaps more protest action. I mean, you can think about this as not unique to the Middle East and North Africa, but also in places like the US, you're seeing a lot of protests on college campuses. This is a group, the youth, who are coming of age, thinking about what their world looks like. We wanted to look at this specifically in this context in Gaza, in part because this was a group that had really come of age under, after the 2006 election, after 2007, the civil conflict between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, thinking through how did they view their world? Were they in some ways different? And I think perhaps unsurprisingly, this is a group that may be more frustrated, is younger, is perhaps not a bit more ideological in a sense. And we do see that there is a bit of a higher support for Hamas, for this idea that I think Hamas may represent of the resistance amongst that group. And so that said, we also don't see some of the differences that we really might expect otherwise, that there are a few differences here, but that this generation, it it is a group that is not necessarily as distinct as one would think, that there is a sense that we see more broadly across the region as well, that there is a collective nature, that if the family is struggling, if other elements are struggling, people don't generally rate their conditions as good. It is a broader context than just the individual who might be doing well, but if the broader family is not doing as well. And so it is something that we've always broken down, but I think one of the surprising findings we've had throughout the years is that the youth population really tends to not be all that different in their views, their perceptions of government overall, but in this case, we do see a slight difference in support for Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
That's great, and when I read your report, I saw it as the people who came of age post 2006 don't have the experience of living under any other form of government, and what does that mean in terms of their responses. So it is very interesting to me to sort of see that there are some similarities, some differences, of course. But overall, the support just is not strongly there for the government of Hamas. I didn't see this in any of your reporting, so if this is not data that you have, we can skip this. But do you have any insights into the difference of support, or do people view the militant wing of Hamas as the same thing as the political wing, or are they viewed separately? And would love to get your insights there.
So we don't have data specifically on this, but I think there are ways to think about it from the data that we have collected. One of the things that we ask about is views towards the peace process, which in some ways is a proxy for thinking about how Hamas has viewed some of these issues. And so what we find is that a majority of Gazans, 54%, say they support a two-state solution. About 10%, respectively, say they support a one-state solution or a confederacy, which is a new idea that has come up in recent years in terms of a potential solution, given the seeming impossibility of a two-state solution, given the expanding Israeli settlements, how this would actually work. So overall, we see that basically about 3/4 of people are saying that they are supporting one of the kind of peaceful options as their optimal solution to this conflict. That said, we have about 20% left who do support armed resistance, who are saying this is from in the Gaza Strip before the Hamas-led attacks against Israel. We do see that 20% say that they would support some form of armed resistance. And the vast majority of those, about 77% of those respondents, are those who do support Hamas. So we do see that there is seemingly a link here between Hamas's broader ideology, how people are thinking about that, and their support for Hamas. So it does seem to go hand in hand that almost all people who support Hamas, those who want a violent resistance, are those who are saying that they are favoring the party itself. And so again, it isn't quite a direct link to say, do people view the government itself and the Hamas's militant wing somewhat differently? We can't say that for sure, but there does seem to be a strong link between Hamas's view on the peace process, on resolving the conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis, and support for Hamas overall. So I do think that there is a strong link here that Hamas is seen more broadly as kind of an overall movement, a government with this militant view towards Israel. And in that sense, there does seem to be a pretty strong link that there isn't necessarily different attitudes between the two. But again, that's kind of looking at the data through this lens. We don't have a direct question on this.
Okay, that's really helpful to sort of break that down for us in a way that we can't get from just looking at the data ourselves or reading some of the reports. So I think to kind of wrap things up, you mentioned that a lot of the reason why you do this work is to provide it to policymakers, to governments, to thought leaders, and help make them make better informed decisions. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in your report was about the impact of Israeli actions on support for Hamas. Now, this is not in any way, shape, or form for any of us to decide whether or not Israel is, doing what it should, what it could, what it might be able to do in terms of their response, but simply to think about what are the recommendations that can be learned from the historical data that you guys have that show what a path forward what might be for a solution.
So we've looked at this historically through the blockade, and Israel, after the 2007 takeover of Gaza by Hamas, implemented a much stricter blockade than they had before, basically limited the amount of items, goods that could go into Gaza. And so what we looked at was, at this point, basically Palestinians by December 2007 or Gazans and specifically, had very low levels of support for Hamas. It had fallen from the time of the election, where they got about 45% of the vote, to just 27%. That said, as the Israelis started to impose the blockade, we actually saw a rise. We saw an increase in support for Hamas in the subsequent years that basically leveled off as this kind of, by 2010, as this came to, as the blockade became kind of the norm. And so we have seen this as things have changed, as Israel's eased the blockade. We've seen a decline in support for Hamas, that basically things are focused more on the domestic situation. There's less an external actor to blame. So what it does seem is that, like many people, Gazans specifically may think of my enemy's enemy as my friend. And in a way, as Hamas has opposed Israel and Israel cracks down and makes life more difficult for the citizens of Gaza, it does potentially push people into the kind of to have a more positive view of Hamas. And so as a result, we do have a sense that, likely, given these strikes, given the very again, the tie to homeland and the sense of who is defending the homeland and what are they doing, even if in a sense this is a reaction to Hamas's actions, there is most likely, again, just speaking from the data we've seen historically, a high probability that Hamas's views could increase as a result of this. That basically there's a kind of a rally around the flag type of effect. That they're being attacked by this external actor, which, again, there is a lot of frustration with the Israelis, a lot of anger by the Gazans over how this has played out, as that really comes to the forefront with this just devastating destruction of Gaza, with what I think to Palestinians themselves doesn't feel like targeted raids on Hamas, but more of a destruction of the Gaza Strip overall. That this is something that's likely to not necessarily lead Palestinians, particularly Gazans, to embrace the peace process. That I'm sure we've seen a change in opinion, and likely one that's leading towards a greater kind of militancy and a reaction that would be more armed resistance, would be my suspicion. Again, we don't have data to show that, but looking at inferring what is likely to happen, this obviously will escalate it and likely lead many Palestinians to want to resist the destruction of their homeland and perhaps embrace the broader Hamas ideology that is giving voice to that. So our sense is that Hamas, at least, even if Israel says that they want to destroy Hamas entirely, trying to do that throughout the broader public opinion to ensure that it doesn't come back and those things. It doesn't seem that that bombing and the destruction of Gaza is necessarily going to lead to that outcome. That certainly Palestinians will be angry. Their homes have been destroyed. There will be all this damage to the Gaza Strip, and so it is, I think, a significant challenge to try to stamp out Hamas in this manner, given what we've seen in the past with Palestinian public opinion.
And of course, this attack by Hamas on Israeli civilians has put Israel in a very tough position to decide how to respond and how they can move forward. And we will leave those decisions to the political leaders of Israel and the broader world. But thank you very much for your insights. I always like to leave these conversations with an opportunity for our speakers to add any final thoughts or add insights that you think we might have missed throughout the conversation. So I'll turn it over to you for some final words.
Well, thanks so much, Tim. Again, I think one of the challenges we have is we don't really know what has happened since then. There's been a few surveys that I think have been attempted since then. Given the situation in Gaza, it's very difficult to understand that. So again, anything that we're talking about for the future, I think, would need additional research. But again, it is something that we were very, I think, able to give a picture of what Gaza looked like on the eve of the attacks. We will be releasing additional data from the survey. There were other questions that weren't included here. And as we do our full reporting on this, again, continue to do that. But we did want to get this out in a sense to set the stage. I mean, this is information, this is data that can be used. And we do want to promote as much of the data that we have to help inform the decisions being made, help think about that. And I think we're fortunate that we're also, again, it's such a sad situation, the tragedy for Israel, the tragedy that is unfolding in the Gaza Strip for the civilians who live there. It's a very difficult situation, and sadly doesn't seem to have, as you were kind of alluding to, a necessarily clear answer in terms of how this gets resolved. But again, we do hope, that this is something that does get resolved, that leads to that the civilians of Gaza are not suffering for kind of the actions of leaders that they did not support. And so, again, we will continue to monitor the situation as best we can from a public opinion standpoint, and have additional data in the future would be our hope.
Well, thank you so much. We'll definitely link to the full report when it is available, so that people can dive into the full scale and scope of the amazing work you guys are doing. Thank you so much for doing this work, for continuing it, particularly in a region of the world that has some pretty tough challenges, but obviously continues, despite the US's desire to focus elsewhere, continues to provide some really unique challenges for the entire world to deal with. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for your interest in this. We are going to host a couple of these types of conversations over the next several weeks and months, trying to provide the broader context around this conflict. We are not a journalistic organization, so we will not be providing updates on specific incidents and how they are occurring at that time, but really trying to help you better understand the broader context. So be on the lookout for future conversations such as this. And please do check out the link when it becomes available into the full report on this very important survey that was done at an extremely critical time. Thank you so much for watching.